I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the fact that, Puffy was able to inspire me to want to work in the music business, specifically in hip hop, and to feel that it was not just plausible, like it's going to happen. And ever since I was a kid, I'm like, I'm going to work at Bad Boy. I don't know how. I have no industry contacts. I hadn't even really been to New York before, but I just knew that it's going to happen. And fast forward, that's what happened. So in the summer of '05, I interned at Bad Boy. I mean, to this day, when I tell people that, like, okay, you got the stripes on your arm, like it meant something. And that was my first like industry experience. I met Puff once. I mean, he was, polite, just it was a very short convo. But I do remember just feeling so blessed to be in this position, like that you're around greatness.
And how old were you then?
I think I was 21 at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was my first like foot in the door in the music business. So fast forward, once I graduated, I was working at.
Oh no, hold on, Samia. Sorry, well, I don't want you to feel like you have to roll through this.
Oh sure.
I want to stop in this moment. The reason why I want to stop in this moment is because if you think about it, Cassie was in her early 20s.
Yeah.
Right? Like to meet someone like this at this age, you're a young woman, especially in this business. I mean, you just use the word blessed.
Yeah.
So what has it been like in your group chats, in your world as people, because I still know the people I interned with, have you talked? Are people like, hey, what did you see? What did you see? Or is there a sense of nobody say anything, especially if you didn't see anything, like just stay away from this?
I think it's mixed. So some people have decided, it's best just not to say anything. I don't know behind the scenes if there's, contractually a reason why, or they just don't feel comfortable. Sometimes people just don't want to get involved. Other times they didn't see anything. So to kind of insert yourself, it feels very unnecessary.
You sound like somebody who has been asked, hey, did you ever see anything? Did you ever see his temper? Did you ever
100%
interactions that you saw or stories that you heard at that time? Are there things you look back at with a different set of eyes?
You know what's crazy? I literally saw none of this. So coming to the music industry, Puffy's temper was well known. This is well known, well documented from his childhood nickname to, his interaction with Steve Stout back in '99 over the Hate Me Now video. Like everyone knew Puff is tough. He's aggressive. If you ever watched Making the Band, even though that was, dramatized for television, there are parts of truth in that.
Yeah, he wasn't nice on that show, just so for people who don't remember. That was not great, the way he talked to those women.
Yeah, and this was also the era, again, of that type of reality show. It was Simon Cowell being mean on American Idol, Tyra Banks, making girls, get full makeovers on Top Model. When we look at it through a lens now, it feels just so mean and so cruel and unnecessary. But sadly, at that time, this was considered entertainment. So every show needed sort of like that villain character. But my interactions with him, I mean, it was completely appropriate. But what I said is, and I've said this publicly on social media, just because I didn't witness anything or experience it personally doesn't mean that it can't be true. And that's something that I've told my colleagues in the music industry, because many of them echo my sentiment. We never saw that, or that I never experienced it. But just because you didn't experience it doesn't mean people can't have multiple facets. And again, I always want to underscore, we're talking about intimate partner violence, allegedly, and that's very different. So how someone acts in a boardroom or at a company meeting can be very different from how they act when they're angry or in their personal life.
I think the perception of him, though, is that those lines were blurred. Constantly, he was always performing in public, right? Performing the mogul. But then you'd see images of the white party, and he was sort of doing it there, too. But then those people really knew him. And I think that, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I know from our conversation how he amassed power. What we're learning in the trial is ways that he conceivably abused his power as a leader right? Even in these businesses, the artists that came later after the Mary J. Blige, period, they aren't as successful,
Well, yes and
right?
no, right? Because I think,
Yes and no, but
yeah.
there wasn't like many more Mary J. Bliges after. There were many women who tried to be, right? There are many people who worked for him, even Danity Kane, which was the group for making the band. I want to get a sense of what ways did he have power in hip hop that people may not realize can have like pretty long tentacles.
Yeah, I think what's important is Puffy was a star maker and a hit maker. So the Bad Boy roster, right? Let's just run down. Notorious B.I.G., one of the greatest rappers of all time. Faith Evans, platinum singer. 112. Carl Thomas, Black Rob. I mean, that's just like on his label. Dandy Kane, 2 number 1 albums. And that was something that nobody had predicted, like a band put together on a reality show would have 2 number 1 records. I think what's interesting, and now some of those artists, especially that were signed to Bad Boy, have come forward. They've talked about predatory contracts. Even during Cassie's trial, she mentioned she was signed to a 10-album deal. And for, I think, the layperson, this is shocking. Sadly, in the music business, especially of that era, 7+ album deals were standard. Like some of your favorite artists are still, although they're hugely successful, icons, they're still fighting to get their masters back, right? So maybe that means in order to make it, I have to sign this terrible contract or be, professionally indebted to somebody I wouldn't want to. But if that's going to potentially make me a superstar or a hit maker or have a platinum plaque on my wall, it's worth it. And that's really a personal decision. But sadly, in the music business, I would say that's more the norm than the exception.
And what we're hearing in testimony from Cassie Ventura is also that, so he's her boyfriend and her boss.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you want to go to the studio, you got to go through him. You want to work with some other artists, you got to go through him. You want to leave the house, you want to go through him.
And also not uncommon. I mean, I think we're seeing it on a more extreme case, but there are many stories, some publicly known, others not so publicly known, especially of young women who get into the music business. They're dating their manager or, they start a relationship with someone at the label. Here we're seeing the truly dark, sad, violent converse of that. But I could see that, for a young woman getting into this industry, getting the affections of any man, but specifically someone as powerful and connected, I'm sure it was very intoxicating. How could it not?
What do you make of hip hop's response, right? The community of fans online, very vocal, the podcasters, to how they are talking about this case. Very much giving Sean Combs more than the benefit of the doubt, very much questioning her motivations. And it's significant because the entire case in court is actually resting on the idea of coercion, right? It's resting on the idea of did she want to be there? Did she not want to be there, right? Was he holding her there? Was she not? And I sometimes hear a strain of well, these women kind of commentary.
Yeah, from what I've seen, it's been a very split response when it comes to how hip hop as an industry or fans, even other artists, how they're reacting to the Puffy case. So I think, as with social media, some people are very quick to judgment on either side. And I always like to say, all right, no matter what, we have to be very careful with how we speak about legal proceedings, allegations. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, right? Regardless, everyone does have certain rights. And I think especially for those of us in the industry, I have to be very mindful of that, not getting into sort of the gossip or the conspiracy rabbit hole and all of these things.
That's not what the internet is like right now, Samia.
Yeah.
To be honest,
yes.
You just go into YouTube and you put Diddy warnings, Diddy, and it's just everybody downloading their theories about this in a way that I haven't even seen with an R. Kelly. There's a real speculation about him, about her. It's very intense.
Well, I think the difference is because Puffy was such a larger-than-life figure in culture, not just in hip-hop, but in pop music, fashion, politics, Broadway. I mean, it really runs the gamut. I think there's just so many different touch points. Like some people may know him only because of the white parties, or they may have seen him on something like the Ellen DeGeneres show. Like they know him from specific slivers. I like to say consider the source, because a lot of people are speaking like hip hop insiders and they're not hip hop insiders. Like I can tell you've never been to the party, you've never met him, you have no idea what's going on, but it's sort of fun to speculate and draw parallels between someone like a Jeffrey Epstein, for example. Like the sensational stuff gets all the clicks. So it's kind of easy to cancel him now, but I would urge people, whether it be fans or artists, the industry, to go deeper than that, because this case truly could be a watershed in how we deal with power dynamics, Me Too, the treatment of women, but it really is
Oh, stop. Wait a second. Go into that more, because when I look at hip hop, it has been very, very resistant to this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that when I was a kid, there were more women in power in hip hop than there are now. And this is across the board, from the media, executives at record labels, decision makers, managers. We're in many cases, I would say like a crisis moment, not just in hip hop, but in society, of how we talk about misogyny, toxic masculinity. Those things are at an all-time high, and culture is very interconnected. So as a society, if certain things are allowed, it's boys will be boys, it's locker room talk, we can't expect it to change in hip hop. But there has to be either a cultural reason to change from a larger scale or a financial reason.
Yeah. But, to challenge that for a second, I think in Hollywood, for better or worse, maybe some people say worse, maybe some people say it didn't work, women in Hollywood were like, enough with the casting couch. That doesn't mean it's gone away, but that conversation was had. It really felt like hip hop and Black music was kind of dragged kicking and screaming a little bit into the conversation, right? Like you have that big R. Kelly moment, and it was Black women who were involved in those documentaries, and Black women who were the victims.
And young girls, yeah.
And young girls. And yet the defense of R. Kelly was so profound. Once these people,
sometimes from women,
from women, once you platform certain people as cultural heroes, representative heroes to, let's say, Black and brown communities, they take on a kind of outsized reverence. And is that why it is so hard to deal with these issues? And I mean in hip hop, right? Like the conversation about Russell Simmons kind of petered away when he left the country. Like I'm talking about hip hop specifically that does not seem to really engage with this in a way that is about moving forward. It's constantly like, well, the women.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because we're still expecting male artists and executives to care about women. And I would like to say that they do.
But why not? I mean, most of the artists, the best artists right now are women, right? Like, even though you're talking about the back rooms being mostly men, we're looking at a moment where, like, there's a ton of women who are the main performers. They are the main event.
But behind the scenes, I mean, the powers that be, and that includes, male artists, they're not really working with these artists. They don't sign female artists or develop them. And there's actually kind of a saying behind the scenes. Certain managers will say, I don't want to work with female artists. It's too much trouble. I don't want to deal with this, the whole hair and makeup thing. And that's a whole other conversation, but the misogyny is just there. And I think it truly is. There's such a power dynamic at play. And because men are running things still, possibly now more so than before, it becomes harder and harder. Music really is kind of like a time machine, right? It can take you back to the best times in your life. There's nostalgia, memories are attached to it. So what is the notion of canceling an artist? In the case of Puffy, okay, maybe you cancel the records that he's on. Are you canceling any artist that was signed to Bad Boy? What about records that he produced on, did an ad lib on? All of a sudden, huge swatches of your childhood or formative discography go away. And this is also the bigger question of, can you cancel art? Do you separate art from the artist? And this is something across the board in art that people debate all the time.
Just before the allegations from Cassie Ventura went kind of to the next level, right, into the legal system, Combs was really enjoying this moment of, he was about to, I think, engage in another reinvention, right, to elder statesman.
The Love era.
He wanted the Love era. Didn't catch. Wanted to call himself Love. Was getting, as we said, a Lifetime Achievement Award from BT. Was talking about the past artists he had worked with and sharing music rights with them, and really kind of showing that he had like evolved. And I felt like he was on the verge of a new version of himself. Now what we see are courtroom drawings of him, you know, looking gray. He's not going to be the same Puffy when he comes out of this. Do you
If
think
he
the
comes
industry
out of
will
this.
have changed? Say more.
We don't know what's going to happen with this trial, regardless of whether he gets time and it's a long sentence or it's a short sentence and he ends up coming home. I think his public image is destroyed, and there's no way you can return from this. Certain rooms he will never be invited to. That's just, he's somebody who's persona non grata.
Even in the fashion world? Even in the Hamptons world?
Yeah, I think he's completely done, because it kind of goes back to having him in a room is going to affect everyone else's like reputation and how much money they can make, right? If they were all talking about business, he's not a figure that's going to add dollar signs. In fact, he's going to detract. So I think right now he will be a pariah regardless of what happens. And as I stated before, he's at a point in his career now that he's actually at the end of his career, regardless of this trial. This is not someone who is actively making hit records. He wasn't doing anything interesting in fashion. He would be sort of a celebrity and show up from now and again, but he's on the older side. Times have changed. Someone who's in Gen Z now, they don't even remember Puff Daddy. Like, who is that, right? That old guy. So I think regardless, his image and reputation, they're really destroyed kind of beyond repair. And that has nothing to do with his freedom. And for a man who's been famous for most of his life, beloved, generally speaking, from the public for most of his life, I think that's probably one of the worst punishments for him, being irrelevant and not being on the guest list.
You mentioned his assistant testifying in court, and the people who have come forward who are other artists or people who worked for him, right? Like members of Danity Kane, for example, are expected to testify. We don't hear much else. Like, has there been a kind of silence in the industry around this case?
Hip hop still isn't sure how to handle this case. So just ask yourself, as an artist, does it behoove you to come forward? What does it mean to you, your career, your legacy, to share your experiences? We don't know how the public is going to take it. Will they be sympathetic? Will you now be blamed? So there's so many things to consider. So I'm not particularly surprised that more artists, executives have not come forward.
But it's not like a groundswell, right? We have seen more victims come forward or people with allegations come forward, but everyone else is pretty much leaving it alone.
And at least from the allegations that have come forward where we know the victims' names, these aren't particularly famous or successful people. And that, unfortunately, is, again, there's no such thing as a perfect victim. And sometimes people will want that. Well, this person, of course, they're coming forward because they don't have a viable career. They never went on to do anything after him. Of course, now they want a big payday. Some people will look at that, and those are the optics. Of course, one has nothing to do with the other, and a victim can be a victim regardless of whether they sell one record or a million records. But when we're dealing with high-profile people and allegations, it's very easy to try to find that victim with a recognizable name, or they have a lot of sort of public goodwill. It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of the way that it is.
And also interesting because this is also part of the complaint against him with some of these allegations, right? Like people felt they weren't paid or compensated for the actual work they wanted or intended to do. And they felt like that was another leverage that he had over them.
And that becomes tricky because even when Danity Kane's Dawn Richard testified, I saw the reactions online, and some people were pointing to the fact that she alleged that she witnessed very heinous abuse and abusive acts against Cassie by her own civil lawsuit. She was the victim of certain acts as well, but she continued to work with him. And that's when they easily want to discredit her. But I would always urge people to look at the nuance. There's a lot of gray. Just think about how hard is it to speak up to your own boss or to just storm out of your company when that's your paycheck. And I think we have to really look at this case with a lot of nuance and sensitivity and really see how things play out, because I think there's more beyond just the headlines.
There's one more aspect of this which is more delicate to talk about, which is about homophobia. In some of the conversations online about the sexual relationship that Cassie Ventura had with Sean Combs, people are very much talking about the male escorts, for instance, who one of them testified in the case. There are also male victims, so to speak, who have put forth allegations. How has that made this case a little bit different or kind of messier in terms of the public response, the hip hop public's response?
Homophobia has been a through line in hip hop for a very long time. I would say only very recently are certain artists coming forward about their own sexuality and fans are much more accepting. But I think just the fact that the idea of No Diddy became a joke and No Diddy became a replacement for what was called no homo.
That is a piece of slang, right? Like the toss-off term for like, oh, well, don't worry, I'm not gay.
Yeah, people still say those things. And again, you just have to wonder where are we in the world? But the homophobia, the jokes, that's what really took on a lot of the conversation, I think, when allegations first came out. What I find interesting, and I've seen just responses online, because from the testimony we've seen so far, Cassie alleges that she had relations with the male escorts and not Puffy. Some people are, now saying that that's a sign of his innocence. I'm not sure how they get to that assertion or that conclusion, but it's almost like, okay, phew, at least that part isn't true. And again, that's where we're conflating so many different issues: homophobia, misogyny, actual sexual abuse and crimes of power. And it's so important that we parse all of this out, because everything can be true or only certain parts can be true. But it's really important to focus on the charges. And, right now we're in the middle of this trial, letting all the witnesses have their moment and speak their truth. If Puffy chooses to speak, that's his right as well. And then a jury of his peers will decide. But what he's on trial for are serious charges, and they need to be treated with that sensitivity as well as the seriousness.
Yeah, but it's like a combination of issues that haven't traditionally been treated with that nuance or seriousness.
And also, sometimes when things are so serious and sad, people want to make a joke. I think social media is very good at that, making light. But it's one thing, sort of understand everyone needs a moment of respite. And it's another to take away from what we're really discussing, which are alleged crimes against women, power dynamics. And these are things that are still very relevant in hip hop and beyond. And that should be the focus.
How do you look back now on all of this in the context of your love, right, for Bad Boy, the company, your appreciation for his music? Like when you told me you were a kid in the Midwest who always wanted to work at Bad Boy,
yeah,
I was really surprised. I don't know kind of what your parents were thinking about that. I admired hip hop women journalists. like so many, that I just was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I want to write for Vibe. I want to, and they fought a good long fight in the industry. And I'm just wondering what this is like for you personally. Are there ways it's made you second guess yourself, your work? Are there ways you are surprised or disappointed in the response within the community? Like, where are you in your head?
It's complex. This trial specifically about Puffy, about Bad Boy, it speaks to my childhood as well as my formative years in the music business. And I think it shows that a lot of things can be true at once.
Are you disappointed? Are you brokenhearted? Like, where are
No,
you?
I mean, I think I've been in the industry for a very long time. And the longer that you're in the music business or the entertainment industry, you learn to separate art from the person. And I also don't let my love for somebody or being a fan blind me from the fact that they can do terrible things and they deserve to be punished for those things. I think as a woman in hip hop specifically and as an authority, I'm just thankful I have a platform to speak out and to really, be able to provide this expertise and nuance that I think is missing from the conversation. And for me, that's a responsibility. But, here's the other thing. To be a woman in hip hop for almost 20 years, I think you just have to be kind of a tough cookie and you have to love it, right? Like no matter what, I'm in this game because I love it. And because I also feel things can get better, they can be improved. And in the same way, I looked up to certain people coming up. I want people to see that when they look at me as well. So I take a lot of responsibility, but also pride in being able to speak about important subjects because there's not a lot of people who look like me in this game. And I think that expertise, the knowledge, and just really sharing what really goes on is so important.